Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another reading. We are going to go back to Star Wars. It's been a while since I've done Star Wars, episode 4, New Hope. And we are in chapter 10. Chapter 10. Lined with power cables and circuitry conduits that rose from the depths and vanished into the heavens, the service trench appeared to be hundreds of kilometers deep. The narrow catwalk running around one side looked like a starched thread glued on a glowing ocean. It was barely wide enough for one man to traverse. One man edged his way along that treacherous walkway now, his gaze intent on something ahead of him instead of the awesome metal abyss below. The clacking sounds of enormous switching devices resounded like captive leviathans in the vast open space, tireless and never sleeping. Two thick cables joined beneath and overlaid that. It was locked, but after careful inspection of sides, top and bottom, Ben Kenobi pressed the panel cover in a particular fashion, causing it to spring aside. A blinking computer terminal was revealed beneath. With equal care, he performed several adjustments to the terminal. His actions were rewarded when several indicator lights on the board changed from red to blue. Without warning, a secondary door closed behind him opened. Close, close behind him opened. Hurriedly reclosing the panel cover, the old man slipped deeper into the shadows. A detachment of troopers had appeared in the portal, and the officer in charge moved to within a couple of meters of the motionless hidden figure. Great. Secure this area until alert has been canceled. As it began to disperse, Kenobi became one with the dark. Chewbacca grunted and wheezed and barely succeeded in forcing his thick torso through the hatchway open to Luke's and Solo's help. That accomplished, Luke turned to take stock of their surroundings. The hallway they had emerged into showed dust on the floor. It gave the impression of not having been used since the station had been built. Probably it was only a repair access corridor. He had no idea where they were. Something hit the wall behind him with a massive thunk, and Luke yelled for everyone to watch out as a long, gelatinous limb worked its way through the hatch and flailed hopefully about should be flailed hopelessly, not hopefully, hopelessly about in the open corridor. Solo aimed his pistol at it as Leia tried to slip past the half-paralyzed Chewbacca. Somebody get that big, hairy, walking combat out of our way. Suddenly she knows what Solo was preparing to do. No, wait. No way it'll be heard. Solo ignored her and fired at the hatchway. The burst of energy was rewarded with a distant roar as an avalanche of weakened wall beaming all but buried the creature in the chamber beyond. Magnified by the narrow corridor, the sounds continued to roll and echo for long minutes afterward. Luke shook his head in disgust, realizing that someone like Solo who spoke with the mouth of a gun might not always act sensibly. Until now, he had sort of looked up to the Korean. But the senseless gesture firing at the hatchway brought them, for the first time in Luke's mind, to the same level. The princess's actions were more surprising themselves, however. Listen, she began, staring up at him. I don't know where you came from, but I'm grateful. Almost as an afterthought, she glanced back at Luke, adding, to both of them. Her attention turned back to Solo. But from now on, you do as I tell you, okay? Solo gaped at her. This time the smug smile wouldn't come. Look, Your Holiness, he was finally able to stammer. Let's get something straight. I take orders for only one person. Me. It's a wonder you're still alive. Leia shot back smoothly. A quick look down the corridor, and she had started determinedly off in the other direction. Solo looked at Luke, starting to say something, and hesitated, and simply shook his head. No reward is worth this. I don't know if there's enough credit in the universe to pay for putting up with her. Hey, slow down. Leia had started around the bend in the corridor, and they ran swiftly to catch up with her. The half-dozen troops milling around the entrance to the power trench were more interested in discussing the peculiar disturbance in the detention block than in paying attention to the present boring duty. So engrossed were they in speculation as to the cause of the trouble that they failed to notice the Fey wraith behind them. It moved from shadow to shadow like a night-stalking ferret, freezing when one of the troopers seemed to turn slightly in its direction, moving on again as if walking on air. Several minutes later, one of the troopers frowned inside his armor, turning to where he thought he had sensed a movement near the opening to the main passageway. There was nothing but an undefinable something which the ghost-like Kenobi had left behind. Acutely uncomfortable, yet understandably unwilling to confess to his hallucinations, the trooper returned back to the more prosaic conversation of his fellows. Someone finally discovered the two unconscious guards tied in the service lockers on board of the captured freighter. Both men remained comatose despite all efforts to revive them. Under the direction of several bickering officers, troopers carried the two armorless combatants down the ramp and toward the nearest hospital bay. On the way, they passed two forms hidden by a small open service panel. 3PO and R2 went unnoticed, despite the proximity to the hangar. As soon as the troopers had passed, R2 finished removing a socket cover and hurriedly shoved his sensor arm into it. Lights commenced a wide flashing on his face, and smoke started issuing from several scenes, and a small droid before frantic 3PO could pull the arm free. Immediately, the smoke vanished. The undisciplined blinking faded to normalcy. R2 emitted a few wilted beeps, successfully giving the impression of a human who had expected a glass of mild wine, and instead unwittingly downed several gulps of something one had eaten. Well, next time, watch where you stick your sensors. 3PO chastised his companion. Could have fried your insides, he eyed the socket. That's a power outlet. Stupid, not an information terminal. R2 whistled a mournful apology. Together they hunted for the proper outlet. Luke, Solo, Chewbacca, and the princess reached the end of an empty hallway. It dead-ended before a large window which overlooked a hangar, giving them a sweeping, tantalizing view of the freighter just below. Pulling out his comlink and looking around him with increasing nervousness, Luke spoke into the pickup. C-3PO do copy. There was a threatening pause, then, I read you, sir. We had to abandon the region around the office. Are you both safe? For the moment. Though I'm not sanguine about my old age. We're in the main hangar across from the ship. Luke looked toward the bay window in surprise. I can't see across the bay. We must be right above you. Stand by. We'll join you as soon as we can. He clicked off, smiling suddenly at 3PO's reference to his old age. Sometimes the tall droid was more human than people. One of the old men was able to knock out the tractor. Solo was muttering as he surveyed the scene below. A dozen or so troopers were moving in and out of the freighter. Getting back to the ship's going to be like flying through five fire rings of foreigners. Leia Organa turned long enough to glance and surprise the ship to Solo. You came here in that wreck? You're braver than I thought. At once praised and insulted, Solo wasn't sure how to react. He settled for giving her a dirty look as it started down the hallway. Chewbacca bringing up the rear. Rounding the corner, the three humans came to an abrupt halt. So did the 20 Imperial troopers marching toward them. Reacting naturally, which is to say without thinking, Solo drew his pistol and charged the platoon, yelling and howling in several languages at the top of his lungs. Startled by the totally unexpected assault and wrongly assuming their attacker knew what he was doing, the troopers started to back away. Several wild shots from the Corellian's pistol initiated complete panic. Ranks and composure shattered, the troopers broke and fled down the passage. Drunk with his own prowess, Solo continued to chase, turning to shout back at Luke, Get to the ship, I'll take care of this. Are you out of your mind? Luke yelled at him. Where do you think you're going? But Solo had already rounded a far bend in the corridor and didn't hear. Not that it would have made any difference. Upset at his partner's disappearance, Chewbacca let out a thunderous, if unsettled, howl, rushed down the hallway after him. That left Luke and Leia standing alone in the empty corridor. Maybe it was too hard on your friend. He certainly is courageous. He certainly is an idiot, a furious Luke countered tightly. I don't know what good it'll do if he gets himself killed. Muted alarm suddenly sounded from the bay below and behind me. That's done it. Let's go. Together they started off in search of a way down to a hangar deck level. Hangar deck level. Solo continued his route of all opposition, running at top speed down the long hallway, yelling and brandishing his pistol. Occasionally, he got off a shot whose effect was more valuable psychologically than tactically. Half the troops were already scattered down various sub passages and corridors. The 10 troopers he continued to harry still raced headlong away from him, returning his fire only indifferent. Then they came up against a dead end, which forced them to turn and confront their opponents. Seeing that the 10 had halted, Solo likewise slowed. Gradually he came to a complete stop. Corellian and Imperials regarded one another silently. Several of the troopers were staring, not at Han, but past him. It suddenly occurred to Solo that he was very much alone, and the same thought was beginning to seep into the minds of the guards he was confronting. Embarrassment gave way rapidly to anger. Rifles and pistols started to come up. Solo took a step backward, fired one shot, then turned and ran like hell. Chewbacca heard the whistle and crump of energy weapons firing as it lumbered lightly down the corridor. There was something odd about them. Odd about them, though. They sounded as if they were coming closer instead of moving away. He was debating what to do when Solo came near, around the corner, and nearly ran down. Seeing 10 troopers in pursuit, the Wookiee decided to reserve his questions for a less confused moment. He turned and followed Solo back up the hallway. Luke grabbed the princess and pulled her back into her recess. She was about to retort angrily as brusqueness, brusqueness, when the sound of marching feet caused her to shrink back into the darkness with it. The squad of soldiers hurried past, responding to the alarms that continued to ring steadily. Luke looked out at the backs, retreating backs, and tried to catch his breath. Our only hope of reaching the ship was from the other side of the hangar. You already know there's someone here. They already know someone's here. He started back down the corridor, motioning her for her to follow. 2 guards appeared at the far end of the passage. They paused and pointed directly at them. Turning, Luke and Leia began running back at Tom. A larger squad of troops rounded the far bend and came racing toward him, blocked ahead and behind. They hunted frantically for another way out. Then Leia spotted the cramped sub-hallway and gestured to it. Luke fired at the nearest of the pursuers and joined her in running down the narrow passage. It looked like a minor service corridor. Behind them, pursuit sounded deafeningly loud in a confining space, but at least it minimized the amount of fire the troops could concentrate on them. A thick hatchway appeared ahead. The lighting beyond turned dimmer, raising Luke's hopes. If they could lock the hatch even for a few moments and lose themselves somewhere beyond, they might have a chance of shaking their immediate tormentors. But the hatch stayed open, showing no inclination to close automatically. Luke was about to let out a shout of triumph when the ground suddenly vanished ahead of him, his toes hanging over nothingness. He flailed to regain his balance, succeeding just in time to nearly go over the edge of the retracted catwalk anyway as the princess plowed into him from behind. The catwalk had been reduced to a stub protruding into empty air. A cool draft caressed Luke's face as the studded walls that soared to unseen heights overhead and plunged to fathomless depths below. The service shaft was employed in circulating and recycling the atmosphere of the station. At the moment, Luke was too frightened and concerned to be angry with the princess for nearly sending them over the edge. Besides, other dangers competed for his attention. A burst of energy exploded above their heads, sending metal slivers flying. I think we made a wrong turn, he murmured, firing back at the advancing troops and illuminating the narrow corridor behind him with destruction. An open hatchway showed on the other side of the chasm. It might as well have been a light year away, hunting along the rim of the doorway. Leia located a switch and hit it quickly. The hatch door behind him slid shut with a sounding boom. At least that cut off fire from rapidly nearing soldiers. It also left the two fugitives balanced precariously on a small section of the catwalk, barely a meter square. If the remaining section were to unexpectedly withdraw into the wall, they would see more of the battle station's interior than either wished. Gesturing for the princess to move aside as much as possible, Luke shielded his eyes and aimed the pistol at the hatch controls. A brief burst of energy melted them flush with the wall, ensuring that no one could open it easily from the other side. Then it turned its attention to the vast cavity blocking their path to the opposite border. It beckoned invitingly at a small yellow rectangle of freedom. Only the soft rush of the air from below sounded until Luke commented, "This is a shield-rated door, but it won't hold them back for long. We got to get across there somehow." Leia agreed, once more examining the metal border in the sealed doorway. "Find the controls to extend the bridge." Some desperate searching produced nothing, while an ominous pounding and hissing sounded from behind the frozen door. A small spot of white appeared in the center of the metal, then began spreading smoke. "They're coming through." The princess turned carefully to stare across the gap. That must have been a single unit bridge, with the controls only on the other side. Reaching up to the point of the panel holding the unreachable controls, Luke's hand caught on something at his waist. A frustrated glance downward revealed the cause and engendered a bit of practical insanity. The cable coiled tightly in small loops. Was thin and fragile seeming, but it was general military issue line and would have supported Chewbacca's weight easily. It certainly ought to hold Leia and himself. Pulling the cable free of the waist catch, he gauged its length, imagining against the width of the abyss. This should span the distance with plenty to spare. "What now?" the princess inquired curiously. Luke didn't reply. Instead, he removed a small but heavy power unit from the utility belt of his armor and tied one end of the cable around it. Making sure the wrapping was secure, he stepped as close to the edge of their uncertain perch as he dared. Whirling the weighted end of the cord in increasing circles, he let it arc across the gorge. It struck an outcropping of the cylindrical conduits on the other side and fell downward. With forced patience, he pulled the loose line back in, then recoiled it for another try. Once again, the weighted end orbited in even greater circles, and again he flung it across the gap. He could feel the rising heat behind him as he let it go. Heat from the melting metal doorway. This time, the heavy end looped around the outcropping of pipes above, wrapping itself several times around, and slipped, battery end down, into a crack between them. Leaning backward, he tugged and pulled on the cable, pulling on it at the same time as he tried to rest all his weight on it. The cable showed no sign of parting. Wrapping the other end of the line several times around his waist and his right arm, he reached out and pulled the princess close to him with the other. The hatch door behind him was now a molten white, and liquid metal was running steadily from its borders. Something warm and pleasant touched Luke's lips, almost alerting every nerve in his body. He looked down in shock at the princess, his mouth still tingling from the kiss. "Just for luck," she murmured with a slight, almost embarrassed smile as he put her arms around him. "We're going to need it." Gripping the thin cable as tightly as possible with his left hand, Luke put his right over it, took a deep breath, and jumped into the air. If he had miscalculated the degree of arc in the swing, he would have missed the open hatch and slammed to a metal wall to either side or below it. If that happened, he doubted he could maintain his grip on the rope. The heart-halting transit was accomplished in less time than thought. In a moment, Luke was on the other side, scrambling on his knees to make sure they didn't fall back into the pit. Leia released her hold on him with admiring timing. She rolled forward into the open hatchway, climbing gracefully to her feet as Luke fought to untangle himself from the cable. A distant whine became a loud hiss and a groan as the hat store on the other side gave way. It collapsed inward and tumbled into the depths. If it touched the bottom, Luke didn't hear it. A few bolts struck a wall nearby. Luke turned his own weapon onto the unsuccessful troopers and returned the fire even as Leia was pulling him into the passageway behind. Once clear of the door, he hit the activated switch, shut tightly behind him. They would have several minutes at least without having to worry about being shot in the back. On the other hand, Luke didn't have the slightest idea where they were, and he found himself wondering what had happened to Han and Chewie. Solo and his Wookiee partner had succeeded in shaking a portion of the pursuers, but it seemed that whenever they slipped free of several soldiers, more appeared to take their place. No question about it, the word was ahead. A series of shield doors were beginning to close. Hurry, Chewie, Solo urged. Chewbacca grunted once, breathing like an overused engine. Despite his immense strength, the Wookiee was not built for long distance sprinting. Only his enormous stride had enabled him to keep pace with the lithe Corellian. Chewbacca left a couple of hairs in one of the doors, but both slipped inside just before the 5 layers slammed shut. That ought to hold them for a while. Solo crowed with delight. The Wookiee growled something at him, but his partner fairly fluoresced with confidence. Of course, I can find the ship from here. Corellians can't get lost. There came another growl, slightly accusing the side. Shola shrugged. Talking to Poe doesn't count. He wasn't Corellian. Besides, I was drunk. Ben Kenobi ducked into the shadows of a narrow passageway, seeming to become part of the meadow itself as a large cluster of troopers hurried past. Pausing to make certain they had all passed, he checked the corridor ahead before starting down. But he failed to see the dark silhouette which eclipsed the light far behind them. Kenobi had avoided one patrol after another, slowly working his way toward the docking bay holding the freighter. Just another 2 turns and he would be at the hangar. What he would do then would be determined by how inconspicuous. I hold on. Okay, that's one. Okay. Blah blah blah. Kenobi had avoided one patrol after another, slowly working his way back to the docking bay, holding the freighter. Just 2 turns. Just another 2 turns, and he should be at the hangar. What he would do then would be determined by how inconspicuous his charges had been. That young Luke, the adventurous Corellian, and his partner, and the 2 robots had been involved in something other than quiet napping he already suspected from the amount of activity he had observed while making his way back from the power trench. Surely all those troops hadn't been out hunting just for him. But something else was troubling them, judging from the references he had overheard concerning a certain important prisoner now escaped. That discovery had puzzled him until he considered the restless natures of both Luke and Han Solo. Undoubtedly, they were involved in some fashion. Ben sensed something directly ahead and slowed cautiously. It had a most familiar feel to it, a half-remembered mental order he could not quite place. And the figure stepped out in front of him, blocking his entry to the hangar not 5 meters away. The outline of the size of the figure completed the momentary puzzle. It was a maturity of the mind that he had sensed that had temporarily confused him. His hand moved naturally to the hilt of his deactivated saber. I have been waiting for you a long time, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Darth Vader intoned solemnly. We meet again at last. The circle has been completed. Kenobi sensed satisfaction hiding beneath the hideous mask. The presence I sensed earlier could only have been. Kenobi regarded the great form blocking his retreat and noted slowly. He gave the impression of being more curious than impressed. You still have much to learn. You will. You still have much to learn. That's Kenobi saying. I apologize. You were once my teacher, Vader admitted, and I learned much from you. But the time of learning has long passed, and I am the master now. The logic that had constituted the missing link in his brilliant pupil remained as absent as before. There would be no reasoning here. Kenobi knew. Igniting his saber, he assumed the pose of warrior ready, a movement accomplished with the ease and elegance of a dancer. Rather roughly, Vader imitated the movement. Several minutes followed without motion as the two men remained staring at each other as if waiting for some proper yet unspoken signal. Kenobi blinked once, shook his head, and tried to clear his eyes, which had begun to water slightly. Sweat beaded up on his forehead and his eyelids fluttered. Your powers are weak, Vader noted emotionless. Old man, your powers are weak, old man. You should never have come back. It will make your end less peaceful than you might have wished. You only sense only a part of the force, Kenobi murmured with the assurance of one to whom death is merely another sensation like sleeping or making love or touching the candle. As always, you perceive its reality as little as a utensil perceives the taste of food. Executing a move of incredible swiftness for one so old, Kenobi lunged at the massive shape. Vader blocked the stab with equal speed, riposting with a counter slash that Kenobi had barely parried. Another part, another parry, and Kenobi countered again. Another parry, and Kenobi countered again, using this opportunity to move around the towering Dark Lord. They continued to trade blows, with the old man now backing toward the hangar. Once the saber invaders locked, the interaction of the two energy fields producing a violent sparking flash, a low buzzing sound noise. A low buzzing sound rose from the straining power units as each saber sought to override the other. 3PO peeked around the entrance to the docking bay, worriedly counting the number of troopers milling around the deserted freighter. Where could it be? Oh, oh! He ducked back outside just as one of the guards glanced in his direction. A second, more cautious appraisal was more rewarding. It revealed Han Solo and Chewbacca hugging the wall of another tunnel on the far side of the bay. Solo also had nonplussed at the number of guards. Was nonplussed at the number of guards, he muttered. Didn't we just leave this party? Chewbacca grunted and both turned on his backs and lowered their weapons at the sight of the princess. What kept you? Solo quipped mirthlessly. We ran into some old friends, Leia said. Luke was staring at the freighter. Is the ship all right? Seems okay. Was Solo's analysis. Doesn't look like they removed anything or disturbed arrangements. Problem's going to get. The problem's going to get. Is the problem is going to be getting to it. Leia suddenly pointed to one of the opposite tunnels. Look, illuminated by the flare from contracting energy fields, Ben Kenobi and Darth Vader were backing toward the bay. The fight attracted the attention of others besides. Every one of the guards moved in for a better view of their own conflict. Now's a chance, Solo observed, starting forward. All 7 of the troopers guarding the ship broke and rushed toward the combatants, going to the Dark Lord's aid. 3PO barely ducked aside as I ran past. Turning back into the alcove, he yelled at his companion. Unplug yourself, R2, we're leaving. As soon as the R2 unit slipped his sensor arm free of the socket, the 2 droids began to slowly edge out into the open bay. Kenobi heard the approaching commotion, spared a glance back at the hangar. The squad of troopers beaming down on him was enough to show that he was trapped. Vader took immediate advantage of the momentary distraction to bring his saber over and down. Kenobi somehow managed to deflect the sweep below at once parrying and turning to complete circle. You still have your skill, but your power fades. Prepare to meet the Force, Obi-Wan. Kenobi gauged the shrinking distance between the oncoming troops and himself, and turned a pitying gaze on Vader. This is a fight you cannot win, Darth. Your power has matured since I taught you, but I too have grown much since our part. If my blade finds its mark, you will cease to exist. But if you cut me down, I will only become more powerful. Heed my words. Your philosophies no longer confuse me, old man. Once again he lunged forward, fainting, fainting, fainting Feinting, fainting and then slashing on the deadly downward arc with the saber. It struck home, cutting the old man clean in half. There was a brief flash as Kenobi's cloak fluttered through the deck in two neat sections. But Ben Kenobi was not in it. Wary of some tricks, Vader poked at the empty cloak sections with the saber. There was no sign of the old man. He had vanished as though he had never existed. The guards slowed their approach and joined Vader in examining the place where Kenobi had stood seconds before. Several of them muttered, and even the awesome presence of the Sith Lord couldn't keep a few of them from feeling a little afraid. A little afraid. Once the guards had turned and dashed for the far tunnel, Solo and the others started with the starship. Until Luke saw Kenobi cut in two, instantly he shifted the direction and was moving toward the guards. Ben! He screamed, firing wildly toward the troopers. Solo cursed, but turned to fire in support of Luke. One of the energy bolts struck the safety release on the tunnel blast door. The emergency hold broken, the heavy door fairly exploded downward. But the guards and Vader leaped clear. The guards into the bay and Vader backward to the opposite side of the door. Solo had turned and started for the entrance to the ship and paused as he saw Luke running toward the guards. It's too late, Leia yelled at him. It's over. No! Luke half shouted, half sobbed, a familiar yet different voice in his ears, Ben's voice. Luke, listen, was all it said. Bewildered, Luke turned to hunt for the source of the admonition. He only saw Leia beckoning to him as he followed R2 and thinking off the ramp. Come on, there's no time. Hesitating, his mind still on that imagined voice, or was it imagined? A confused look took aim and felled several soldiers before he too whirled and retreated into the freighter. It's chapter 10 of Star Wars: A New Hope.